Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk about all things to increase muscle and performance and improve body composition. Do all of it within a flexible framework without destroying your health. Today on the podcast, we've got Dr. Darren Candow, and we're talking all about the many aspects of the supplement creatine. I'm sure you're probably familiar with creatine. It's been around for a long time, but feels like it's making another resurgence into population, and we've gotten a lot more questions about creatine over the past, especially 6 months, and wanted to get Dr. Candow on here. So he's one of the top creatine researchers in the world. He's a professor at the University of Regina, where he leads the Aging, Muscle, and Bone Health Laboratory, which is looking at how creatine, resistance training, and nutrition can improve muscle, bone, and brain health, especially as we age. Published over 120 peer-reviewed papers, supervised more than 20 graduate students, and has gotten a ton of funding from various different organizations. And he's worked on some really cool and really large multi-year studies involving creatine and many other subject areas too. So I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. And again, it's always great to get the researchers on here who are doing the actual research in the field. And if you want more information on creatine, if you're listening this week when this podcast comes out, I'll have a ton more on the newsletter. It's free to hop onto the newsletter. We'll put a link down below. And then also, I just finished a ebook, complete manual on creatine. And I wanted to make this something that was relatively short. I think it came in at about almost 50 pages, so I'd say it's not super short. And talking about all the different research in creatine for muscle, bone, brain, covering everything from what type do you need to use, the timing, research, are there any issues with it interfering with perhaps coffee or caffeine? And you'll find more information on that. We'll put a link down below. And we also have Dr. Candow has some quotes in there, along with my other research buddies, Dr. Eric Rothson and Dr. Scott Forbes. And so far, the feedback on it's been really good. So check that out down below if you want a one-stop shop for all things creatine in a way you can understand that's still based on the research. I think in that we've got, I think we have almost like 47 different research topics or papers we ended up using in the end. And if you want more information, like I said, hop on to the newsletter below. And without further ado, here is the podcast with Dr. Candow. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Candow. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It was nice to see you at ISSN again, as always, which is great.
You too.
And I know you're doing a lot of traveling around this past year, correct?
Yeah,
it's a
lot of requests, especially around creatine's explosion on health and longevity, and quite a bit coming up as well.
Awesome. Any big ones coming up as of this recording?
Yeah, I have. I go to Austin for the ISSN in the NutriBullet one, and then I speak for Gatorade at a sport dietitian conference in May, and then ISSN Europe is in Spain, which will be lovely. In October.
Oh, Spain. Nice.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. So very fortunate, and I try to accept all the offers to travel, especially.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious. I've never asked you this. Like, how did you get into studying creatine? Because you're not one of these people who just said, oh, look, it's popular now, I'm going to study it now. You've been doing this for years and years.
Yeah, about 2 decades, and it was likely by accident. So my master's degree, I've read Jose Antonio's review on glutamine, and wow, this is going to be like the next big thing. And this was in 1999, and I said, okay, let's propose a master's thesis on high-dose glutamine supplementation on resistance training adaptations with placebo. And at the same time, a good colleague of mine, Dr. Darren Buck, who published some really seminal studies on creatine early on, and then went more into industry. He was doing creatine research. So I was doing glutamine, he was doing creatine, and lo and behold, when I did my master's thesis, it was really objecting at you do a high dose. It was a great study, but all the results came back with no significant findings. And it was interesting that It didn't have any effect on body composition, strength. It didn't even reduce muscle protein breakdown. And now we've come to learn, a non-essential amino acid by itself is essentially useless because our body's obviously getting it or through the diet. But at the same time, he was finding really significant results by these individuals were getting bigger, stronger, faster on creatine during weightlifting. And I started to become more interested in the significant effects. And then I started to think about what populations might benefit from more muscle mass, strength, and performance. So my PhD went into healthy aging, and that opened the doors for a lot of population interests, not just for athletes, but actually now for pretty much anybody. And then it's evolved into postmenopausal females. We're now looking at the brain. So I think by not finding significance, like if glutamine worked, I might have stayed in individual amino acid paths. So I'm very fortunate that it didn't. And it was also good to show no findings. Glutamine has its place maybe for long duration exercise or for some anti-inflammatory effects for people with sepsis or cancer. But really from a healthy human perspective, in my opinion, is essentially worthless. From a supplement perspective, the creatine obviously is one of the big hitters. Yeah.
I think glutamine might, and I know I'm stretching on this, useful for possibly immune function in people who are maybe overreaching, maybe on the borderline of frank overtraining syndrome. That's something I've always kind of wondered about, but I can't point to a lot of literature on it, to be honest.
Yeah, there's some cellular evidence to suggest that in extreme cases of overtraining or undernutrition or catabolic stress, primarily in animals, high dose glutamine might have some application, but in healthy individuals, we don't see any effects. Resistance training is not that catabolic or stressful to the body. Long duration marathon training is totally different. So I don't see any good evidence in healthy individuals. It might have application for medical intervention, sepsis, cancer, something like that. But, from if you go to a store and buy glutamine and hope that it's going to do anything, it's not. So I sort of can rest my laurels on that. I rank glutamine as probably the most worthless supplement out there to buy from a healthy, but others would argue against that thing. Depends on the context you're arguing out.
Sure. If we go to the flip side, what would you say are probably your top 3 supplements that people should look into?
Yeah, so obviously creatine, and I say that from an evidence-based research. We're seeing profound benefits now. Hard to get enough in the diet. I also like caffeine has such great exercise potential. I don't love protein in the supplement form unless you can't get it through the diet. But my big 3 right now is creatine, caffeine, and the omega-3 fatty acids are always there for me just because it has the potential. And I don't think enough people are getting it through the diet. But when you look at, the beta alanines and all that, they all have a place. But the ones that I go to each day is caffeine through coffee, creatine, and of course, omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah. And there's some very interesting data on, obviously ISSN has published this too, on coffee versus caffeine and just all the other beneficial effects of coffee. And obviously you get caffeine with it too.
Yeah, I think on average 1,000 antioxidants per cup. And the one that I'm keeping my eye on closely, and I hope as I get older, is this, the big focus on NAD supplements. There's a lot of potential in rodents, but the MNN and NR, could we get more of this in the aging cell to offset reactive oxidative species with the mitochondria? So I'm really hoping this comes more into light from a healthy aging perspective. So it's very cool in our areas, we know a lot, but there's more we don't know. And then it's really kind of cool when these new ideas come to light and then we determine if they're effective or not and which populations they might be. But it's definitely one that I'm starting to pay more attention to and hope that it could be something to look at from a healthy aging perspective.
Yeah, I find the whole NAD area super fascinating. Like, as you know, there's a lot of early work. There's a lot of mechanistic stuff. There's a cool physiologic story. It decreases with aging. So all the stuff leading up to it. But right now, I've been kind of sorely disappointed in some of the outcome studies, at least for healthy people, like pathologies. That's a whole separate area. I may have tested 2 to 3 grams of NR for 8 weeks on my own just to see if there's any effect. I couldn't notice anything.
Yeah.
And again, N of 1, all that other kind of caveats apply to it. So it's, I think it's a super interesting area, but
Yeah.
it just, I would love to see more simplistically designed studies for just more, because I'm like, if it increases energy,
Mhm.
it should be ergogenic, right? We should see some benefit in athletes. And right now, I just don't see a lot, but I can't point to a ton of data that's looked at it either.
Yeah, I think the big context, since we both exercise, we're helping maintain that. The ironic thing, going back to creatine, exercise doesn't cause an increase in creatine. Whereas if you
No,
high intensity exercise, NAD levels through the glycolytic pathway and
they go
electron.
up.
So maybe could NAD down the road have potential for more sedentary individuals with
Yes.
chronic EAT? So that's where I think the context is, but that's an area I think that, in a couple of years, hopefully we'll have more clinical trials and maybe it turns out to be useless if you're healthy. But I mean, in the context of aging, I think anybody's willing to at least listen and then make an educated guess.
Yeah. And that would kind of make more sense that if
Yeah.
you've got air quote defects or different things in that pathway, that it's helping with that. But if
Right.
you're, already pretty healthy, you're already relatively trained, which to me is always still fascinated me about creatine, that
Mhm.
if you would have asked me like even 10, 20 years ago, and I didn't know anything about creatine, you're like, hey,
Yeah.
you take this supplement on healthy people who are
Mhm.
athletes, and you can see an ergogenic effect above that you can, in essence, push more creatine into a healthy muscle. I would have said, I don't know, that sounds crazy, man. Well, I don't think physiology
Mhm.
works that way, but we've got tons of data saying that it does exactly that.
Yeah, it's funny, and this all goes back to the Harris study in
Yeah.
1992, and what gets often overlooked, and it's quite surprising, it was such a low sample size, but two individuals in that study, which were larger, went way above the expected 100.
Way above.
And so when people say there's a ceiling, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me now that a 280-pound offensive lineman for the New England Patriots has the same ceiling as I do? It's just, it doesn't make sense. And so on average, we think it is. And, maybe your internal muscle stores are 80% full of creatine as we sit here today, and supplementation can give you an extra 20, but it's context specific. Your diet, what your muscle fiber morphology dictates it, how much you're eating. And so I think what's happened is we've expanded our at least curiosity that maybe not everybody's muscles have the same capacity. And then, of course, now we're starting to see, well, how is creatine having some potential bone benefits, cardiovascular, and of course, the brain? And now we need to drive more in to disperse to other areas. So I've raised the question recently is like, okay, if we accept that the majority of creatine go into our muscle, what happens if other tissues are in desperate need of creatine before muscle? So, for example, if you're chronically sleep deprived, jet lag, whatever, maybe when you consume creatine, not all of it goes to our muscles like we once thought. Maybe the brain is now extracting a greater percentage and less go to your muscles. So, I've been one of the big pushers of a higher dose. I love how these social media influencers take our information, go on these world famous platforms and say you need to take 10 grams and all that, and actually no studies ever shown that. It was my personal opinion about 6 years ago, and it makes sense. I think 10 grams a day checks all the boxes from bone, brain, and muscle. And could you go a bit more, a bit less? Absolutely. I think consistency is there, and we do have a series of studies coming out now, finally putting the nail in the coffin about the timing and the creatine. We essentially think it's essentially useless per se as a main factor. But I love how the roller coaster of creatine has come. We thought we knew everything, and then we introduced different tissues, and now we're almost, geez, I don't know if we knew hardly anything, and now we need to do more research on it. So it's still fascinating, but it's quite ironic. It's been around over 130 years, and we're still researching it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems weird to me that you can't do anything now on social media and people are like, well, just take 20 grams of creatine.
Yeah.
It seems like that's the new Band-Aid
Right.
fix-all for everything.
Yeah. And to your point, they've taken individual studies in a very unique setting, the 20 to 30 gram for sleep deprivation. Remember,
Right.
these individuals were healthy. They volunteered to be sleep deprived for just one day. But people take that result and say, wow, I'm not getting a good enough sleep every week. I said, that is not what the study said. It did not say to take 20 or 30 grams every single day for 7 days. It was a very acute, just to show you that there could be some rescuing effects. So we need to do these. And I worry that a lot of things are taken out of context. But by doing more podcasts like this, hopefully they hear and sort of tone down our expectations of what creatine really does. Nothing will rescue the effects of a bad night's sleep. Creatine might help a little bit, but at the end of the day, a better night's sleep is going to be the safety factor. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's cool, and I can't remember if it was that study or a different study, I believe did MRS to try to look at the actual mechanism of what's going on. So it wasn't just here's an outcome, which is a great study. They actually were able to get down and see like mechanistically what was going on.
Yeah. And that series of studies now, there's been about 5 or 6 that use MRS, and they've clearly showed, yeah, creatine can get past the blood-brain barrier, accumulate into the brain. The argument is, well, where is it accumulating in the brain? Like, what if it's in areas that may not need it? There's some variation. You know, we often never consider the minimal detectable change needed to overcome the instrument error. But of course, MRS is about $600 a scan. So super expensive studies.
Super expensive.
From a reliability and a pre-test, post-test. But the nice thing is we're confident now that creatine, yes, has the ability to get into the brain, and some of the mechanisms very similar to muscle. This is why I think it could work. It seems to decrease inflammation or oxidative stress. So if you're healthy, sleeping well, creatine is probably going to be useless from a brain health perspective because you're already making it. God, if you're sleep deprived, you're an overnight worker, you're a student staying up all night, if you're traveling on air flights all the time, even time zone, I got to believe that's where creatine can come to the rescue a small amount. Anecdotally now, when I fly to Europe especially, I try to take about 20 grams for those few days before and during, and I've noticed I don't get as jet lagged as much, or at least I'm more clear from a cognitive and memory perspective. And I wish I would have known this in the inception of my academic days, you know, trying to get tenure and grants, you're staying up all night.
Yeah, I know.
Drinking way too much coffee. I wish we just said a little bit more is okay. And the nice thing is Rick Kreider put out that great study last year looking at all the adverse effects, and even at high dose, there's no greater effects than placebo. So taking a little bit more is fine. We're not talking like protein, you know, 200-300 grams. We're talking maybe instead of half a teaspoon, a full teaspoon a day. We've shown now recently that you can take that dose split up. You can take it all at once if you like, or you can take, you know, a few grams in the morning, a few grams later. It will have very similar effects. So I think creatine is come full circle where it's a lot easier to consume than most people think. You can, if you're consistent, we don't think that the dose of caffeine, if it's more than 350 milligrams, will interfere. And most coffees and multiple coffees are not. So whatever is the delivery agent for you that works is great. They come out with gummies and candies and whichever. And I think at the end of it, if they're all a stable form of bioavailable creatine, I think it's great. I just hope more people at least consider the evidence to say, is this for me? I don't see any reason why you can't, unless you have a metabolic condition where creatine for some reason would interfere with medication. Stacey Ellery in Australia is looking at it from pregnancy. And of course, we look at it in older individuals. And the collective body of evidence suggests it's probably the most safest, effective ergogenic aid that we can now take.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people. Like, if we don't know what the potential upside is, like, do we at least know what the potential downside is?
Right.
And I feel like with creatine, we've got decades of data, even in high dose data for long periods of time. Almost all the data shows that it's exceedingly safe. Obviously, at some dose, there's going to be an issue, but for the most part, the downside is pretty well clarified. And so if you want to try 10, 15, 20 grams, like, okay, go ahead. Like, I don't think there's much of a negative to doing that per se.
Yeah. And of course, Serge Bosiak is really coming up with some really cool data just on the diet from Enhanced data. And about 1 gram seems to be the minimal amount. If you're getting 1 gram through food, it seems to offset some effects from children's development all the way into now anti-cancer effects. And, you know, creatine is only found in animal-based products, red meat, seafood, and poultry. So that begs the question, what if you're a vegan, a vegetarian? That's where supplementation may have to come into play. And again, for those that are eating a high meat diet, a carnivore, you may not need hardly any from supplementation, but you have to decide, how does your diet look? You know, when you're traveling, it's very difficult to eat high quality foods. For example, on an airplane, they don't give you anything. In the airport, it's very difficult. When you get to the hotel, it can be difficult there. And maybe that's where those supplements can rescue some of those effects. But at the end of the day, you know, creatine is being promoted as a conditionally essential nutrient. I think that comes from the areas showing that a little bit more has these profound benefits, but from a nutrition perspective, you can't say that because individuals, vegans, vegetarians, have a very successful, healthy life with no dietary creatine. The only time it becomes essential is for those that are born with an inborn creatine deficiency. That means they lack the enzyme to make it. That's where high dose seems to come into play. And I agree with you. I don't see any downside by taking the supplement. It has no adverse effects on liver, kidney, blood cell count. We've never measured any adverse effects in the brain yet. We're not seeing any reports from that. For those that are looking at me, if they're on camera, creatine doesn't directly cause any baldness, although
I was just going to say,
so
I'm like, I've been taking it for 20 years.
Exactly. And so people, I think it's on the idea, maybe it's too good to be true. It's now being used by celebrities and it's being, one-liners in movies. But at the end of it, it was discovered in 1832, about 60 years before ATP. And I think most people say, hey, I've heard of ATP, but I didn't realize that with creatine. And it just didn't get a lot of momentum until 1992. And then it's taken the sport nutrition industry by storm. And we could literally sit here for 10 hours and I could go through 2 hours of creatine research on muscle, another 2 on bone, 3 hours on brain. And then you look at all those caveats. So at the end of the day, it's one of the reasons the IOC ranks it as one of the top supplements. The Olympics start this week, or actually yesterday. I got to believe the majority of those high performance athletes, depending on the sport, will be taking creatine. The interesting thing, the evolution is now when you look at cross-country skiing and long duration winter sports, creatine has been shown now to reduce markers of inflammation. So creatine might have application essentially for everybody. If it's not from a muscle performance, could it be from a cognitive perspective? It is interesting, yeah.
I only got to chat with Roger Harris a few times while he was alive, and just the nicest dude. Like, I tried for 10 minutes to finally get a picture with him.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no one wants a picture of me. I'm like, you're Roger Harris. Like, I want a picture with you.
Yeah.
But I think if I remember correctly, when he started looking at creatine, everyone kind of thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
They're like, what are you doing?
Yes. It was, by accident again. It was designed that he wanted to see some elegance or information in animals. And then he said, okay, I'm going to consume this and measure it. And then he went and did his post-op with Eric Holtman in Sweden. And then they put out those 2 studies in 1992 and 96, clearly showing that, a single 5-gram dose really maximizes the amount in the blood. And that lasts for about 6 hours. Or you could take 3 grams a day. It doesn't peak as much, but it gets to the same level after a month. And that's why when you hear 3 to 5 grams a day, that's a very viable dose. Now, in context, that's only from a muscle perspective.
Yes.
When it gets to bone, we think we need a bit more in the brain. We definitely think we need more there. So if someone's listening to this and say, yeah, my teenager's only interested in improving like lean mass and strength, I think they could start as little as 3 to 5 grams a day with or without a loading phase. And you'll get to that. But for the middle-aged individual saying, oh, my doctor said I'm having a reduction in bone density or mass, maybe they're going to need a bit more in combination with exercise. And then when you get from the neck up, the lowest dose ever been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier and accumulate is 4 grams, but that was in a population diagnosed with long COVID. So the idea is maybe the brain was under a lot of inflammatory stress. The majority of the studies suggest 20 grams a day. You may have heard about 10-gram dose. That's based on a study of Utah where one group who took 10 grams a day, they doubled the amount of brain creatine levels compared to 2 or 4 grams, but it wasn't significantly different. So what's odd is if I take more, I check off all the boxes. I personally take at least 10 grams a day, and that definitely checks the box for muscle, bone, and hopefully is accumulating in the brain.
Yeah, we had Dr. Eric Ralston on the podcast a couple of years ago now, and we were talking with him about some of the early work he's done in there. And for listeners, as you know, it's much harder to look at brain levels because MRS is probably the best. We can't do biopsies of brain tissue in humans like we can just stick a needle in your muscle and grab direct measures. So since that podcast and even before, what are your thoughts about creatine prophylactically for potential reduction of TBI, concussion, things like that? That's something I've personally been doing before kiteboarding trips. I've suggested it to athletes in contact sports.
Yes.
Again, on the premises of a ton of data there, but I feel very confident that there's really not a whole lot of harm associated with doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I'm 100% for it based on a couple things. So if you look at the animal research, this is where it's got its inception.
Yeah.
In a study done in mice where they gave a high dose of creatine before going through head trauma.
Yeah. They
The
whacked
mice,
him on the head.
that's right. The mice had about 50% less cortical damage when they took creatine. And then when they took, they introduced a concussion and then gave creatine after, the symptoms were reduced as well. So we haven't done that yet in humans. We're trying to do that. But the idea is, well, if creatine speeds up and the recovery symptoms of concussion, what if you gave it before the individual suffered head trauma? The brain might have an increased bioenergetics or ability to recover. I use the same analogy. If you're going in for pre-ACL surgery, why wouldn't you take something that might help speed up recovery by taking it? Could Sidney Crosby have come back from his concussions quicker if he had it? Eric Lindros, professional football players. So I totally agree that anybody involved in head contact sports, I think at UFC,
Yeah. MMA.
oh my heaven, like I think the data is suggesting take it before in hope it can speed up recovery. There's certainly no downside. So I 100% tell that to my students or athletes. If you're involved in head contact sports, this is something that has no downside. If anything, it has potential upside.
And I know we're definitely speculating here, but what I've done is I've had him go up to 20 grams per day, starting out maybe 3-4 weeks before the event, if they know they've got a season coming up or they've got a fight or things like that. Figuring we don't exactly know how long it takes to saturate the brain, but it appears to be higher dose, probably appears to be a little bit longer, but I can't point to a ton of studies that have looked at that.
Yeah, this one study out of Brazil looked at 20 grams or a little bit more for 7 days, and it didn't accumulate. But if you do it a little bit longer, there's other studies to suggest that during times of metabolic stress. So I agree with you. If I had a UFC fighter and his match was on, just say Saturday, I would probably be recommending 20 grams or more, at least 7 days, if not longer. And then, of course, right after the match, taking it again. So I don't know if you watched the Ryder Cup, but Rory McIlroy on Sunday looked so exhausted. And he actually has come to publicly say he takes 20 grams a day. And he just looks so exhausted. The argument is, since he went through 3 days of hell, metabolic stress, physicality, could he actually have taken a higher dose that had something left in the tank when he played Scheffler on Sunday? We don't know. But even an elite athlete like that with multi-millions of dollars, he just looked exhausted. And that opens the idea of discussion of areas or people that we've never considered. And, you know, I think of musicians on tour continuously, 3 hours, like Taylor Swift did I think her concerts were each like 2.5, 3 hours.
Crazy.
Multiple. It doesn't matter how much money you have, your body's got to go through a lot of training and adaptation and cognition to remember that. And but I think of musicians or other individuals we haven't even really tapped into, or other types of sports, not just the mainstream ones. So I think there's going to be application for a lot of different populations we never thought, where creatine might have some application for improving their work performance.
Yeah. And I did a presentation on a different topic for the F1 teams.
Yes.
And, you know, I wasn't necessarily, there's some Q&A, so I was kind of suggesting creatine might be useful because you've got a sport that has, I don't think people realize the amount of physical exertion that those athletes go through. The heart rates are just pegged the whole time, and cognitively incredibly demanding. Like, you think you've got creatine may help with the cognitive and maybe the physical components at the same time.
Yeah. And then I totally agree. And then I go back to, like, we don't think the diet influences the brain levels because we're making enough.
Doesn't seem to. But
there's been a little bit of data from Carolyn Ray where vegans and vegetarians might respond favorably. So I wonder if a lot of people out there, they're emphasizing a plant-based diet for whatever reason, they could potentially benefit more from supplementation for something they never thought of. You know, the World Cup's coming up in the summer. From a soccer perspective, there's evidence that, creatine can improve soccer performance. My question is, what if there's 5 minutes to go left in the championship game? Can the athletes have a little bit more cognitive function to make that pass or strike a little bit better when there's 100,000 people watching you? This is where it's sort of evolving to a whole body supplement perspective.
Yeah, with soccer, there's very interesting studies on just the impact of heading the ball too. And obviously in professional soccer, that's legal.
Mhm.
So I've often wondered, I don't know of any study, but it'd be interesting to see. I don't know how you could rank performance at the end of the game versus this guy, headed the ball 6 times before that. I just
Yep.
have this gut feeling that every time you do that, you're just
Right.
losing a little bit. I
Yeah.
can't point to any study, but
Yeah.
again, back to prophylactically, maybe it'll help in those
Yep.
cases, high stress, everything else going
Yeah.
on.
And the nice thing is we have some pretty good data. 'Cause, some of those sports are susceptible to weight gain. And if you
Yeah.
do incorrectly the loading phase, if you do add a little bit of water, but we now know you can take smaller, more micro dosing and it doesn't have those effects. So at the end of the day, I think it has applications for almost essentially every athlete out there. It would have been cool for someone to survey the Olympic Games, in Milan, and see how many people are taking it, and then the correlation to performance there would be very interesting. Yeah.
I would imagine it's got to be virtually everyone at this point.
I'm
I
thinking,
remember
yeah,
when the
yeah.
beta alanine kind of came on the
Yep.
scene. And was it the South Korean sprint skaters, I think, were like the main team that was public
Right.
about using it, and they did really well. And that was many, many, many years ago.
Like speed skaters, if they're not taking bicarb and
Yeah.
short and beta alanine and creatine for the effects that these are the best of the best. And I gotta believe they have the best sports dietitians in the world, or hopefully supplying it. But our Canadian men's and females hockey team, are they taking creatine to offset the effects of not only concussion but performance? I gotta believe, or hopefully our research is finally getting out there. But it would have been interesting to actually do a qualitative type of study on survey analysis and see what they're consuming. But yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. Go back to something you mentioned before about caffeine and creatine.
Yes. Yep.
This seems to be one of those things that just never seems to go away. So the
Never
first question
dies.
is,
Yeah, it's right.
is there any mechanistic data to say that there might be an interaction? And then what do the actual outcome studies show?
Yeah. So the great studies out of Europe clearly show there is a mechanistic potential. So for those listening, this is really point of clarity. Calcium is really important in the sarcoplasmic reticulum to bind to troponin to allow your muscles to contract. So caffeine seems to speed up the release of calcium, which is great. More calcium release combined and cause a muscle to contract. And that's why caffeine is one of the most ergogenic aids from a muscle performance perspective. On the alternative side, creatine likes to take calcium back in. So unfortunately, you argue maybe there's a tug of war. Maybe caffeine is releasing calcium and then creatine is bringing it back in. So there's been a couple studies by Vandenberg, and of course, the legendary Peter Hespel in creatine research showing that when you take a high dose caffeine in conjunction with high dose creatine, they do oppose each other at the calcium cycling. That has been shown to interfere with muscle relaxation, but it's never been shown to interfere directly with hypertrophy or strength or things like that. When you look closely at the cellular data, they didn't give coffee or tea. They gave pure caffeine powder. And the dose was based on the size of the person, but on average, it was 350 milligrams. So the person listening saying, hey, I just had a cup of coffee, on average, a drip cup is 80 milligrams. I think a large Starbucks at best would be maybe 3 to 350.
Yeah.
But again, it's two different deliveries. You have a coffee or a tea or a chocolate bar or a cola versus pure powder. So at the end of the day, there is a potential, but there's also other studies suggesting that lower dose creatine does not interfere. So if someone's listening, say, the only way I'm going to take creatine is if I take a teaspoon and dump it in my coffee, I'm totally for it. I don't see any evidence to suggest there's interference. But if you start to notice you're putting your creatine in a large coffee, and you're letting it sit all day, you heat it up in the microwave, you let it sit, you heat it up again and again, and you're not noticing any benefits, it's possible that there's an interference effect. We've done the only study to date looking at caffeine powder and creatine powder combined, and they sort of oppose each other from a muscle growth perspective, but it was a super, super low sample size. So you can't really conclude much. So at the end of the day, I'm not seeing any reason there's a huge interference effect as long as the dose is below 350.
Yeah, that was kind of my general thought of that. There's probably not much of an interference effect. And again, if people are super worried, they could just take creatine at a different time. It's going to be stored in the muscle. The acute dose you're taking is probably not going to have a huge, massive effect either. Where we know timing and dose of caffeine is super important for
Yes,
performance.
fully agree. And at the end of it, the pharmacokinetic dynamics are not interfered between the two. So pragmatically, I don't see any reason why you would have to specifically separate them. But if you're really conscious of it, pre-exercise caffeine is the gold standard. You can essentially take creatine anytime you want it. But at the end of the day, if this is the only time you're willing to consume it, I don't see any reason why not.
Related question on caffeine. Do you still think in the sort of the published research, and I've helped with some of these ISSN research reviews and stuff on it, the 3 milligram per kg up to 6 milligram per kg, I agree that the literature does show that, but I've also noticed individually the response is extremely wide.
It's a very wide, a lot of genetic predisposition for it, but you're right, on average 3 to 5 or even 3 to 6 seems to be that wide range. And so for those listening, if you're 70 kilograms, that gives you a base at 210 milligrams all the way up to almost 500. And so if your delivery agent is coffee or tea, that's quite a bit a day. Most people, if you're looking at a pre-workout, it's going to be a bit higher. So I think the nice thing is that there's a wide range. People can choose to have that where, it's an adenosine antagonist. There's evidence that it can influence the sodium potassium pump. When you combine it with other things, I use caffeine as sort of the spark plug to get the body in that going.
Yeah.
And they've looked at the effects of caffeine on hypertrophy, nothing really stimulating the mTOR pathway. And it makes sense. It's not designed for that. Luckily, it doesn't interfere with hypertrophy per se. So you could take your coffee before. I don't see any advantageous effects of taking caffeine immediately after exercise. It doesn't really influence fat oxidation from a noticeable effect. So you're right. You can take it at any time, but pre-caffeine or pre-exercise caffeine is logical and it makes the most sense.
Awesome. I'm trying to think, and I may have got this completely wrong, but wasn't there some study showing that caffeine post-exercise, was it increasing L-carnitine or something like that? Or did I get that completely wrong?
I'm not aware of that one, but
I'd have to go back and look that up now. There's something where I can't remember it, but it was giving caffeine at a high dose after exercise did something. And I was like, that's super interesting from a mechanistic standpoint, but basically worthless in the real world.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of how it would increase histidine residue to get carnitine or beta, like alanine. So
forgive me. I'll have to go look it up now.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it, but that's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah. So back to creatine. I know you've done some work on bone now. It appears a massive study you were involved with. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we've done a series of smaller ones. And of course, the big one finally got published a few years ago. So we took a large group of postmenopausal females and we put them on a pretty high dose of creatine, 0.14 grams per kilogram. So on average, it was about 10 to 12 grams a day for 2 straight years. And when we performed supervised resistance training and also encouraged walking. And lo and behold, over 2 years, all that creatine did was preserve bone strength. It had a little bit of favorable effects on geometry compared to the females on placebo. So it was quite eye-opening because I had a lot of hope for creatine on bone density and matrix, and it really just helped preserve the bone. Now, you would argue that's still beneficial, especially for postmenopausal individuals, but it didn't have profound benefits. The big take-home is it did not improve bone density. It just sort of preserved what they had. So that could have applications for those that are small framed. They have osteopenia. We don't know, could it rescue the effects of osteoporosis? So those were primarily done in older adults. The question is, what if we started this in young individuals, primarily biological females, during adolescence? Could we accrue more bone? So when they do start to lose it, they had more. And of course, those are longitudinal studies. So at the end of the day, I think there's a place for creatine potential in certain populations for bone health. But if you're a young, healthy individual, we're not seeing any evidence to suggest it has anabolic effects. Best lines of evidence suggest it has anti-catabolic effects. So almost like a bisphosphonate, it might preserve bone matrix over time.
Super interesting. What are your thoughts about in doing bone research about bone mineral density versus geometry? Because one of the labs I was in, they're one of the early labs that actually was able to start looking at geometry. And for the people I know in that lab, their sort of argument was, and this is 10 years ago now, that Yeah, bone mineral density is okay. It's easy to get, but it's not the be all end all measurement it's kind of made out to be without
Mhm.
knowing what the bone physically looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. The bone research is almost awful. It just takes so long to do. And
Yeah, it's
when
hard to do.
when you measure density, you're measuring, like, I don't know if people can see, but when you're measuring the density, you're just measuring the aerial bone, right? So picture a pen in your hand. All you're measuring is the weight of the bone, but you have no idea what's inside. And of course, with CT and high resolution CT scans, you can go in and look at trabecular and cortical bone, or as you talked about, bone architecture or geometry. So we've evolved with technology. It's super expensive. A lot of people refrain from bone research because it takes about 6 months minimum to see any statistical noticeable effects. But for those that are willing to do it, it's very expensive. But to tone down the expectations, those changes in bone are so small that we really don't see a noticeable big change. And you're right. If you're relying on DEXA, a two-dimensional, it just measures the weight of the bone. But the bone strength and architecture is likely more important than just measuring the density. So if you have 3 to 4 compartment tools to do that, it's even better. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's so hard too about that research. Like you said, the timelines are just so long. I mean, even the worst case, like if you look at how long it takes to see osteoporosis, right? You're talking decades. So even if we do something positive, we can't expect to see a difference in like a couple months.
Yeah. And it's so hard to get an individual, a master's student, to do bone research because they don't want to be paying tuition and waiting so long. And for a PhD, you almost need to start from the get-go. So the people who do bone research, my hat is off to you. It takes a long time. It's a slow, a painful process to see any big changes. You can measure urinary markers, but at the end of the day, most people are susceptible, say, hey, I want to know how strong and rigid my bone is getting. And then by doing that, you also want to take it a step further and say, okay, if the bone got stronger, now does it actually decrease fractures? And so now you need to do another year or two longitudinal studies. So, that study you alluded to, it took a decade from start to finish to finally publish, because we also measure falls fracture indices for a year later. And, when you're measuring large sample sizes, it can take a long period of time. And that's why this bone area is very trying from an academic's perspective. Yeah.
And do you remember the rough cost of that? I think it was in the millions of dollars, for the total time.
Yeah, in Canada, it approached over $500,000 just for the DEXA supervision and things like that. So if you were to extrapolate that in today's terms, it'd probably be well over $1 million US to do that study again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the part people forget, that how expensive this is. Someone's got to pay for it.
Right.
Someone's got to do the measurements. Someone has to be on the study, ideally from start to finish, to see everything, through. And and like you said, getting grad students to do a long-term project that it's just a hard sell all the way around.
And when you're asking someone to volunteer their time for 3 years, the withdrawal rate is always
so
very
high.
high. So, it's great for the person, but everybody's time constraints and, asking someone to volunteer for those periods of time. So that's why these long-term studies are so difficult, almost near impossible to do at a scientific level that you would expect.
Yeah. And so they're definitely needed. And one of my little pet peeves of people who argue online is, we just need more long-term chronic studies on bone and stuff. I'm like, do you have any idea how much time, effort, money, etc. goes into that? And I'm not arguing that we don't need them. We 100% need them.
Oh, we definitely need them, but I agree.
It's just, man, that's a heavy lift.
Totally. Yeah.
What about cardiac effects? Do you think there's some effects with creatine?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it doesn't have much effect on VO2 max per se in the athletes, but I think as we get older, Eric Rawson and Mike Ormsby could have put out a couple studies last year about, improving endothelial function or vasodilation, and that can have applications for cardiac rehab. So I think from the cardiovascular side, it has more of an application from a rehabilitation perspective, heart failure, things like that. And the cardiomyocyte uses creatine just like, our skeletal muscle. So I think there is potential application for those listening that are in that area, maybe look at those few studies but there is something there. Yeah.
The question I get all the time is creatine forms. I remember you've been around long enough to see the whole creatine ethyl ester craze, where their whole marketing was they had a glass, they put it in there and they see it dissolve. And they're like, look, this is amazing. It dissolves so much better. It's more, air quotes, bioavailable. And I remember talking to Roger Harris about this, and he's just like shaking his head. And according to him, that they got lucky that where the body cleaves it off, it actually was not toxic. But he's like, if the body cleaved it at a different spot, it would have been highly toxic. The people who came out with it, I guess, didn't do a lot of toxicology studies. It turned out to be not really beneficial and not really negative.
Yeah.
But he was very worried at the time. This is many years ago, about everyone and their brother at the time was trying to come out with this new form of creatine.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, people are just putting them on the market without doing basic toxicology research or anything else. And his argument was, what problem are you trying to solve with these new forms?
Yeah, it's all, I mean, every day I lump it into quackery, right? So this idea that you can get higher bioavailability, more stability in solution, more solubility, God forbid it got into the cell quicker. My argument is, show me the study that shows all that from a safety profile, and then that is better than monohydrate. And of course, no study has been done that. There's one that just came out. I laughed the other day, liposomal creatine. It gets past the plasma memory. Like creatine is hydrophilic, but it still has the active transporter. Also, it gets through the circular quicker, but show me the data. And it's triple the price. It's fancier. You can take it from a different delivery. So I think what's happened with creatine monohydrate white powder was so boring. We thought we knew everything. From a money grab perspective, I tell everybody, just stick to monohydrate, make sure it's a reputable third-party tested, and I'm guaranteeing that you're going to save a lot more money. We know the safety profile, and you're probably going to have a lot more efficacy behind it.
Yeah. Awesome. Last question. Where do you think the future of creatine is going? Obviously, you work actively in this field. I know you've got stuff going on you probably can't talk about yet, but just in general, where do you think we're going?
Yeah, I think in a few key areas. So I think the anti-cancer properties of creatine are potential from an adjunct to a therapy is there, especially from the anti-inflammatory perspective. I think I'm really curious on Stacey Ellery's work around pregnancy and fetal development and how the transition there as well. And then the biggest one, I think, from a big is that from the neck up, we need to do big studies on neurological diseases.
Yeah.
The one that we're hoping to is the traumatic brain injury. Could it be a prophylactic concussion? I think for the next 2 decades, that's the area we're going to be focusing on. Can we get it in different areas of the brain to improve? So I think, creatine's not going away anytime soon. And then the fourth area is, what about creatine in combination with other ingredients? The essential amino acids. Could creatine and collagen have potential for those with osteoarthritis? What about creatine and magnesium? So I think creatine is going to be one of those main ingredients in a multi-ingredient supplement. So I think this area will be evolving for the next 2-3 decades at least.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the research and everything in your lab and everyone you've collaborated with has done over the years to push everything forward. Where can people find out more about you? I know you've got some stuff on Instagram and other places.
No, thanks for having me. And I think Instagram is the easiest. We just post, research articles and stuff about creatine. So at Dr. Darren Candow is probably the easiest. Yeah.
And then are you looking for any graduate students or anything of that nature?
Yeah, right now I have 6 that are defending, and then I've committed to one in the fall. And then after that, we'll certainly reset and see. So nothing currently right now, but we'll reset in a few years. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. Huge thanks to Dr. Candow for coming on the podcast and sharing all the wonderful knowledge he's accumulated and actually helped take part and literally help create a lot of the data we have on creatine. And also, if you want more information from all sorts of researchers, especially in the area of sports nutrition, check out the International Society of Sports Nutrition annual meeting coming up in Florida this June. So we'll put a link down below for more information. I'll be giving a talk there this year, along with a ton of other people. If you have any questions on it, you can just drop me a note. But great conference, great people, always wonderful to see everybody again and get all the latest and greatest information. Speaking of the latest and greatest on creatine, I put together the complete manual on creatine. It's a downloadable PDF you can get as soon as you purchase below. And I wanted to cover all of the areas from muscle to brain to even cognition and several other areas in an easy to digest, readable format, but it still has all of the reference and everything. And that actually, I started working on this almost 2 years ago. And the part that took me the longest recently was just going through and trying to verify all the actual references, making sure it was laid out in a way that people could understand and that it has the details. But you'll learn all about what type of creatine is best, everything from timing to interactions. Do you need a higher dose if you're using it more for cognition or brain effects? They cover all of that there. If you want more information about that this week, check out the newsletter below. We've got free stuff there as always. We've got a highlight this week all about creatine. You'll be able to learn a lot more there for free. And if you're not listening to that this week, then you can still hop on and get a lot more free information there. So thanks again, Dr. Darren Candow. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. As always, if you could help us out by doing the download and subscribe and share, that always helps with distribution of the podcast. If you have time, leave us a short review. All that stuff is super, super helpful. If there's someone you think may find this information about creatine useful, please forward it on to them or share it on social media. Make sure to tag me so I can say thank you so much. So thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Really appreciate it. Talk to all of you next week.
What do you suppose they call that? A novelty act? I don't know, but it wasn't too bad. Well, that's a novelty.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.